Robinhood Radio presents award-winning author John Neufeld with Side Effects.
Mrs. Pelosi's address Thursday morning has set us on a dangerous but ideally healthy path. It has also brought the nation to a fairly complete halt, while committees of one type or another cogitate and query. This is an unsettled time, but that seems now to be a perpetual state of stasis. Until we get a complete understanding of what the future holds for the Republic, we're still traveling down memory lane. This was called the basic misunderstanding and is from long ago. Here's the problem. If one criticizes the president, millions of his followers feel they too are being criticized, made fun of, looked down upon. This means there is no difference between criticizing him and the country itself, and therefore them. This is not true, but there is no point in exercising our lungs trying to make distinctions. Their minds have been made up. Yet people who loathe the president do more than detest him. They really and truly worry about A, the state of the nation, but more importantly, B, the state of the people who support him. This may sound patronizing, but we assure you it isn't. So many Trump voters voted for him because they needed to. He was making promises which, if fulfilled, could materially alter for the better the daily state of their lives and the lives of their families, their businesses, their futures. Having been forgotten for years on end by state and federal governmental programs in which others more fortunate live daily, they were disbelieving and certainly doubtful of the promise all Americans presumably believe, that we are free, that we make our own decisions, that we have mobility tied to hard work and religious ambition. The needs and desires of perhaps half the nation have been too long ignored. The physical presence of these people was evaporating, literally and figuratively. What mattered to them seemed to matter to no one else, certainly to no one in a position to change their situations, their daily lives. In time, over the years, it came to seem that fully half the country was made of ghosts, people who worked their hearts out, got nowhere they could point to proudly, and were unable to send their children forward into the future and feel confident of their success. Making daily life more complex were educational systems that failed to arm children for later successes of any kind. Even worse, health insurance was a jungle in which men and women daily sank into muck and disappeared, rarely surfacing with assistance, help, or knowledge. Usually, however, if they survived an incident, they did so after losing hard-won savings, having to take second and third jobs to keep their families' heads above water. Many were forced into bankruptcy. Millions did not dream nightly of improvement. They were not existing on fairy tales. They knew about class, caste, and status. It was not make-believe that they were the object of others' attitudes. The gaps that are so frequently written about in income, in achievement, in aspiration, were not airless imaginings. They were real. What these people of little hope and perhaps enormous anger did not begin to imagine was that those around, above and underneath them could feel, empathize, had the real ability to walk in their shoes, at least figuratively. Better, or worse, these silent allies cared deeply about how not to make even less of these stateless citizens by grandly and noisily promoting charities, gifts, teachings, wisdom, and warnings. Homelessness, for example, was not an abstraction to them. Food stamps were not. Working from 4 to 11, 11 to 4, 4 to 11 was and is imaginable. In the election of 2016, although half the country it felt it had a bead on Trump and the likelihood of his doing a fraction of what he promised, the other half clung to the real necessity of his proffered changes because they had to. They'd tried everything else. And here was where the two halves passed in the night. One half had trouble imagining that the other half couldn't see rolling disaster and Trumpism snaking over the hills. The other half didn't care what it was being warned of, at least it would be different. He would be theirs. But Americans are generous, understanding, involved. Look, for example, at the new ways to survive catastrophe. Local newscasts, ad hoc fundraising at fairs and markets, charitable 5 and 10K runs. Go-to pages on Facebook, FundMe's social media helps, to which millions have contributed because they could understand the nature of the need, the sadness of hopelessness, the urgency of neighbors down on their luck. Not to mention the hordes of helpers and carpenters and steel workers and painters and cement specialists who might drive 800 miles overnight to help a community that had just suffered another 100-year flood or a tornado or a fire. These first responders were made up of other disadvantaged men and women and children, but also by others, people of simple goodwill, people whose lives were steadier and more rewarding, people who could see rainbows in downpours. It wasn't luck that was letting people down. What it was believing in bizarre promises that simply could not be fulfilled, but in which they had to believe or go off the deep end. Factories would be rebuilt, industries would come back to life, coal was king. Maybe what we needed was a trade war, easily won and something no American citizens would ever feel. Movements began to make noise. Marches raised blisters and millions. Retired men and women rejoined the workforce, even for a limited amount of time, because they had the know-how and the patience that others might lack. Because they had connections, because they knew how to motorize through impenetrable systems, because they knew who to know and had histories in which together they had achieved wonderful things. All these could be shared and built upon. Time, money, technology, willingness, and empathy from those not in need as well as for those who needed it. The points we're making are that regardless of class, caste, status, Americans believe in themselves and in helping others to achieve more, better, safer, healthier. People are not asking strangers or friends how they could have voted one way or another. People are not arguing about what is to come. They're simply trying their best to live through some of the strangest years we've ever seen. People are not asking how other voters could have failed to realize that what was emanating from Washington was only making their lives worse. Nor do they continue to puzzle over how others could not understand that what they were purposely voting for was plainly against their own interests. It is too late for all that. What matters now, more than anything else, is securing the greatness of our nation for our own futures, and in fact, for the future of the world. In the nick of time, we see humanity, progress, and justice. Phew. I'm John Neufeld.
All opinions on side effects are those of John Neufeld and do not represent necessarily the opinions of Robin Hood Radio, robinhoodradio.com, CATV6, or any of the employees, volunteers, or underwriters of Tri-State Public Communications.